everybody, I'm Elizabeth Hines from ourpaleofamily.com, and today I'm making one of my very best paleo recipes. So this is based on a recipe that I received from somebody that I used to work with way back before my husband and I even met. So I've been making it for a long time, and it is baklava. And believe it or not, we're going to make a paleo version of baklava, which means it's grain-free and it's dairy-free, and it's free of all those like super refined sugars and oils. And we don't have phyllo dough, so it's easier to work with, but we're going to do this layering process, which is why I'm doing the video, because it's slightly complicated. You just have to read the instructions carefully and follow the instructions, and then you get that layered effect like baklava. And it's so good. One of our very best friends has named this better than baklava because it just has this amazing texture and flavor, and it's indulgent with all of the nuts. We have 12 ounces of different types of nuts, and so it's really special. It's great any time of year, honestly, but we tend to make it at Christmas. I used to sell this actually, so for a while I did not post the recipe because I was selling it, but I don't have time for that anymore, so we're just back to baking for fun around here. So we have basically two things we're making. We're making the crust, and then we're making the nut filling, and then we're mixing those two things together in different amounts to give us the layered effect. So in my bowl, I'm making the crust, and this is, the recipe's on the website, so you can get the amounts there, but it's almond flour. It's my basic baking recipe of almond flour and arrowroot, and then we've added some salt and cinnamon and palm shortening and honey, a third of a cup of this raw honey. So that is our little bit of sweetener, a little stickiness. It'll give a really nice texture to this crust. You could use a mixer if you wanted to. Just a hand mixer would be fine. I really should have a bigger bowl. It would make it a little easier on myself, but this will be fine. We're just going to mix this all together, and it'll make a nice soft dough. And at the very end, I get my hands in there so I can just really mix it together well. Okay, so once you get this nice and smooth and completely mixed, we're going to set aside 1/2 a cup. Let me make sure I'm correct. Yep, set aside 1/2 cup. I measured my arrowroot in this, so there's nothing weird in there. Okay, so 1/2 cup, and then I take the rest. We want every bit of this goodness, so there's some of it stuck on my spatula, so I'm just going to get that off. And we're going to, it's such a nice dough, I ought to make something else out of this. I'm going to take about 2/3 of this, so I sort of pat it into a circle so I can visually just divide this into thirds. I'm going to set 1/3 of it aside, right? Yes, so there's 1/3 of my topping, and here's 2/3. We're going to put this in our pan. This is a 9x13 pan. It's just in a baking sheet form, so it doesn't have the big high sides like a traditional 9x13 casserole pan. And I'm just going to pat this in. The earrings are flopping, banging me in the head. This just takes a couple minutes. The dough's really soft. It's not really sticky, but if it starts to get a little sticky to the point that it's sticking to your fingers while you're trying to press it out, just wet your fingers lightly, and that will keep it from sticking. I used to say, you know, like oil your fingers, but really just a little bit of water works just as well. Aim to get it an even thickness, but don't get out a ruler. You know, it's fine. It's just food. It's really yummy food, but it's just food. Okay, so I need to update my recipe because I have tweaked this a little bit. as I was making it, as I said, to sell, I improved it a little bit. So I say to bake this for 15 minutes. I'm really just going to bake it for like 3 or 4, just till it starts to set a little bit. Okay, so my crust is going to go in there just for a few minutes while I make my nut mixture, which is made up of 12 ounces of nuts, pistachios. Phew, all of a sudden, smelling that candle. Pistachios would be a traditional choice for baklava. My son is allergic, so we don't use pistachios. We use a combination of walnuts and pecans, and that's delicious. You could use really any combination of nuts that you like. And there's somebody at my door. Okay, so I weighed my nuts. If you do not have a kitchen scale, I highly recommend it. 12 ounces of nuts, and then I chopped them in my food processor to the point that they were very fine. The lady who gave me the recipe, there was a big piece in there. She said in her recipe the size of the head of a matchstick. So really, really fine. You don't go all the way to making almond butter or walnut butter, but very fine. Then we also have 2 tablespoons of maple syrup, 2 tablespoons of coconut sugar. If you can't use coconut, or you just don't have coconut sugar, you don't want it, you can substitute with brown sugar. You know, that's refined. It's only 2 tablespoons, whatever. You can use brown sugar, or you can just leave it out. Again, it's just 2 tablespoons. You can use maple sugar, the granulated kind, but I wouldn't add more maple syrup. That will affect the texture a little bit. And then a teaspoon and a half of ground cinnamon. Okay, so we'll just give this a stir. We have that little bit of wetness in there with the maple syrup, so you want to make sure you get that all distributed evenly. I'm just going to look through my recipe to make sure I tell you everything exactly right. I did have a mistake in my press cookie recipe, and I hate it when that happens, because then somebody does what I said and it doesn't turn out, and I had made a mistake, so I feel really badly about that. So I'm trying to be super careful. So I'm making my nut mixture. My crust is baking for a few minutes, and I'm going to take it out and I'm going to put some ghee over the top. So ghee is clarified butter. I just made this. I just put it on my stove as low as it will go, and all the milk solids will come to the top. I just melted a chunk of Kerrygold butter, and then I run it through some cheesecloth to make sure I get all the milk solids out. Okay, so here's my nut mixture. So you know when you make, well, if you don't know, even if you've never made baklava, it's delicious and you should try this. But in traditional baklava, you have those thin sheets of phyllo pastry, that very, very thin paper-like pastry, and you lay down a sheet of phyllo and then you brush it with butter, and another sheet of phyllo and you brush it with butter, and on and on and on. And as you bake it, it bakes up nice and light and fluffy and crispy, and you get that space in between from the butter. And so we're getting some of that flavor with our ghee. So we're replicating all those same flavors, just in a better way. Okay, so can you see my crust? It looks like it's just sort of melted, which is what I want. And the reason I'm not baking it as long, in my recipe it says 15 minutes, and I'm going to change that, because then it was pretty solid, and if it's not all set up, as you add the next layers, you can really press them together, and then it holds together well. When I baked the crust all the way, it would, you'd have all those sort of flaky layers, but as you ate it, it just kind of crumbled all apart. And so I like to have it stay together. Just kind of lightly spread and make sure that ghee gets everywhere. It's basically butter oil. That's what ghee is. I don't like any of the commercially prepared ones, honestly. You can find it a lot of places now, but I don't care for the flavor of them. But when I make it homemade, I like it. Okay, so I have made my nut mixture here. I'm going to put the lid on that so I don't knock it over. And also at the very end, when I pull this out of the oven, I'm going to drizzle honey over the top. So we had 1/3 of a cup in the crust, and we're going to put 1/3 of a cup, a little bit less, over the top. The recipe calls for 1/3 of a cup. That's what I've always used. It's good, but we're just eating so little sugar, I just cut back a teeny bit. I'm going to put this on the back of my stove, so as the heat vents out of my oven, it will get this nice and liquidy, and it will pour easily. Okay, so next up, so there's my crust ready. I have my nut mixture, and I'm reserving 1 cup of this. So there's my reserved crust, there's my reserved nut mixture, and then all the rest of this goes over the top. And I really use my fingers because it helps me do the job better. I can very carefully get into the corners, all around the edges. It smells so good. The cinnamon is hitting the hot crust, releasing its yummy scent. Okay, and then at this point I take my my third of the crust that was left, okay, and I combine that with my cup of nuts, of the nut mixture. So combine this together. Use your hands, use a spoon, a spatula, whatever. And then just sort of sprinkle this around. It's going to be a little bit sticky. Not sticky, but you know, it's not loose like the nuts, so you're going to be sprinkling it in little chunks. And again, the whole purpose of this is to give us that layered effect that you get with traditional baklava. And it's not hard, it's just a little bit of a process. How do y'all cook? Do you read a recipe and then get everything out and then get started, or do you just see what's first and do that first and then get out the next thing? I'm just curious what you do. I used to cook that way, just, you know, get things out one at a time. But I have started, I think because I was, you know, trying to prep things for videos, I have started getting all of my ingredients out at the beginning, and it makes it so much easier, in my opinion. You know, to each his own, honestly. I say just cook, whatever it takes to get people in the kitchen, just cook. But I do like having everything ready for me. And then we take this half a cup that we had reserved from the very beginning and just sort of dot this around, fill in the spaces from where you were just putting out that last layer. Does that make sense? And then at the very end, well, I'll show you what I do. Try to get it even, but don't drive yourself crazy with it either, okay? So I just lightly wet my fingers, and then I'm going to press down. And it's pressing that nut layer down into the crust layer that was just barely baked. And then we're pressing these layers down. This will help sort of even it out too. So if you maybe have a big clump someplace and a little bit of a skinnier spot next to it, it will, you can even it out at this point. I need just a little bit more water. So just run them under the sink and then shake the excess water off. And my hands are clean, of course. Y'all are real sticklers for cleanliness and no cross-contamination. I get a lot of comments about, oh, you put that meat on a dirty plate. Well, I really didn't. You know, we cut out where I washed the plate or swapped it out, something like that. So trust me, I'm washing my hands all the time. Okay, so it's all pressed down, and this is going in the oven for 25 minutes, and it will get lightly browned. Okay, my baklava is out of the oven. Can you see how it's this lovely golden brown color all over? That's exactly what you want. It takes anywhere from 20 to 23 minutes. And then I have my honey that was warming on the back of the stove. It's nice and easy to pour. And I just want to drizzle that all over. Definitely get around the edges. I'm going to need a spatula to get all of that out. Ooh, this is hot in my hand. I may reduce this to 1/4 of a cup. I mean, the part of the purpose of the honey is, of course, the delicious honey flavor, but then it sort of helps glue those layers together, which you need because the all of those nuts are kind of crumbly, and you want this to stick together, which of course traditional baklava is pretty crumbly. But anyway, I like it when it holds together. Trust me, just trust me. So get that honey spread all over. I think I did 1/3 of a cup. I think 1/4 of a cup would be enough to do the job, and then you have just a little bit less sugar. And also honey is expensive, good quality honey, so save a little bit of money with that too. So just kind of gently keep spreading it. It's not super fragile or anything, just don't act like a barbarian, you know. So that gets evenly across and soaked in. And we can't cut it, y'all. We can't. It has to set up. So something you can do is line your pan with parchment, and it'll totally cool, and then you can just lift it out, and it's easy to cut, which I should have done that, but I was lazy. I just greased my pan with a little bit of coconut oil, and it'll be fine. It'll be easy to get out. I'll just use a nice little spatula like this one, a little narrow one. You want kind of small pieces. We're going to have to let it sit and cool until I can show you what it looks like in the end. Hey everybody, so the baklava has had a chance to set up, and you can see my honey is all absorbed, and I'm just going to take a butter knife, use a thin spatula, whatever, just run around the outside, kind of loosen it. It looks like somebody took a piece of this already. I can't imagine who would do such a thing, but I hope whoever did it enjoyed it. She did. Okay, so I'm just cutting this in small squares. I like to use this little spatula. It's like 1.5 inches because it's the perfect size. So I'll actually cut it with that. Cut it into little squares, and let me just show you. It's it holds together really well. It is nice and golden brown on the top and on the bottom, and you have that sort of chewy, the honey and the nuts. I won't eat it because we're going out to dinner, but it tastes like baklava, but so much better, which is why it's called Better Than Baklava. So I hope you make this. I hope you saw that it wasn't difficult. There are a few steps, so just follow the steps. It's an easy one to make, and you will wow your friends and family who maybe are doubters in your paleo lifestyle. I think if you make this for them, you'll convert anybody. Okay, that's it. Better Than Baklava. You can find the recipe on the blog. Thanks, everybody.